Good evening everyone, Titus here for part 4 of the Qbert mini-series, and in this video we'll be tackling the heads-up display to give some progress updates to our player. Let's not waste any time and jump right into it. Alright, so starting off we're going to create 2 folders. First one is of course going to be widgets, and then the second folder is going to be fonts. Then I'm going to actually open up, and I have some fonts that I pulled from the web. So I'm going to go ahead and use some of those to make my widget look a little bit better. You can of course use any fonts that you like. And then I'll do yes to all for that. And then the other thing is under materials, I created a Qbert image that I'm going to be using as my life or lives indicator for my HUD. So with that created, I'm going to go to widgets, right click, create a user interface, widget blueprint, user widget, and I'm going to call it WBP_HUD. Open that up here. And every widget I think pretty much needs a canvas panel. So we'll start by dragging that in. And then for my alignment, I'm actually going to use what's called a horizontal box. I'm going to use 4 of them. For my first one, I'm just going to title it, I guess, top left. I'm going to anchor. You can hold Control and click an anchor point, and then go back and hold Shift, and it kind of centers it like just right. And then I like to just mess with the alignment just a little bit. So for this one, I'm going to do -0.1, and then I'm going to do -0.5. And then I'm going to check the box for size to content, and I'm done with that one. So move on to this one. I'm going to call it center. Hold Control. You see it's just slightly offset, so I can go back and hold Shift, and then it centers it perfectly. And then for the alignment, I'm just going to simply drop this one down to a -1, and then check the box for size to content, and then I'm done with that one. For the third one here, call this top right. Hold Control, click there, hold Shift, and you see it centers it just right. And then for my alignment on this one, I'm going to do a 1.1 to go the other way, and then -0.5 to bring it down in line with the left one as well. And then size to content, that one's good. Last but not least, we're going to do bottom right. So we'll call it bottom right. And then hold Control, and then hold Shift. And then the alignment on this one's a little bit different. I think I'm going to use 1.1 and then 1.5. Size, and then we're good. Now for the elements I'm going to be using, top left is going to be a couple text elements, so I'll drag text into there, and then I can highlight the text field, and this one is going to say cubes left, and I'm going to add a space. As for the font, I'm going to use Pixel 2 with a 65 on the size. And then I'm going to go to outline and do a 6 to give a nice little shadow. You can kind of see right there a little bit. Oops. And I think that looks pretty good. For the second element, I'm actually going to just simply right click on cubes left and just duplicate it. The difference being is this one I'm going to change the name of it to just be called cubes, because this one is going to be a variable. So I'm going to check that is variable at the top, and that's very important. As for the text to show, I'm just going to put the number 0, and then it's going to keep all my font stuff the same there. And then that looks pretty good. The reason we want it to be a variable is because we're going to set up some code to where it passes in an integer value into the heads-up display, and I'll show you that in just a second. For the center box, we're going to add a couple of text elements. So I'll drag one in here. I'm going to select it. I'm going to call this one minutes. Check the is variable, because this one is going to be a variable. I'm I'm gonna set the text to 0, 0. And then the font's gonna be pixel 2, 65, outline size of 6, so it has that nice shadow, and I think that looks pretty good. So I'm gonna right click on minutes, duplicate it twice, and then on the middle one, I'm just gonna call this text, and I'm gonna uncheck the is variable, and I'm gonna change the text element to be a, I think it's a semicolon. And I don't want that to be a variable. That's just going to be basic text. But the minutes to, I'm actually going to change that to, you probably guessed, seconds, because that's going to be our seconds. That one is going to be a variable, and then that can stay as a 0, 0. So far this is how we're looking. It's looking pretty good. For the top right, that's going to be our score. So that's going to be 2 text elements. So I'll drag this into here, select it, and this one's going to say, oh, I'm sorry, this one's just actually going to be, let me undo that because I actually don't need to mess with that. Right here, I'm going to change the text to say score, put a space, and then another space, and then lock that in like that. I'll set the font to pixel 2, I'll do 65, outline size of 6, and that looks pretty good. Now I'm just going to right click on it and duplicate it, and this one is actually going to be my score. I'm going to check the is variable because that one is a variable, and I'm just going to set the score to 0 for now, and then everything else looks good. So we have this sort of setup. And then last but not least, the horizontal box bottom right, I'm going to do something a little bit different with this one. I'm actually going to use an image for this, so I'll drag an image in, and then on the image, images come in as variables, so that's perfect. This one I'm going to call life 1, and then for the brush, I'm going to press Control Spacebar, select my little Qbert that I made, so he's highlighted, and then I can hit this arrow, and it pops him in. Under image size, I'm going to try maybe a 128 by 128, and then I think that looks pretty good. And then all I have to do is just right click and duplicate a couple times. I'm going to do the classic 3 lives, I think is probably sufficient. But I need to rename each one, so this one's going to be life 2, and this one will be life number 3. And all I'm going to do to adjust the lives is I'm just going to reference these variables, you know, life 1, 2, or 3, and I'm just going to set the opacity to 0, so just kind of like make it hidden. So I'll show you there's a lot of different ways you can set up your HUD, so you can get pretty creative with it. But this pretty much completes the HUD setup, at least the design layout of it. So you can see there's not much there, but there's a lot of elements that we're going to have to set up later. I think for this video, I want to try to keep it somewhat short, so I'm just going to do the cubes left, and I'll do the game timer. We will save the score and the lives for a later video. But with that said, let's go into the graph editor, and let's find an empty space. So we're going to need 2 functions, right? So we're going to need a custom event, one to update the cubes, and then we need another custom event, and this is to, of course, update the time. Pretty straightforward and basic, right? For the update the cubes, I'm going to add a input. I'm just going to call this the cubes left, and I'm going to make it an integer. And then for update the time, that's going to have 2. I'm going to have the minutes. I'll do min, and then I'll do seconds. So just kind of like this. Now, the way we can update our graph, so you can see the cubes left, we have this variable that we called cubes, right? So I can actually grab cubes, do a get reference on it, drag off that, and do set text. And then I just simply have to drag this into here, It has this nice little function that's basically going to return the value that's passed to it and update our text element to be that value. So pretty simple. And then for the update the time, if we go back to the designer view, you see the time has two variables. It has a minute variable and a seconds variable. So it's kind of more of the same. We're just going to grab the minutes, so I'll hold control, and then I'm going to hold control and grab the seconds, drag off this and do set text, drag off this, set text, hook up the execution pins like so, and then it's just all you have to do is just drag in the I'll probably need to get a little bit of room, but minutes into the minutes like so, and then seconds into the seconds, and we will try to make this a little even. Now with this toText integer function, what you'll want to do is, you'll notice in the time I have it as a two numbers side by side, right? So if you want to keep that same format, just hit the drop down on these and make sure the minimum integral digits is 2 and the max is 2. And that way it keeps your formatting for your time nice and tidy. To actually drive the logic, because you're probably thinking that passes the value in, but where do we get the value, right? And that is an important note. These functions aren't doing any calculations. They're simply taking an input, which is from something that has to be passed to them, and then updating their respective text field, basically, right? So they're not doing any mathematics here right now. So to be able to do that, we actually need to decide where we want to drive that logic. For a game like this, it probably makes the most sense to do it in your player pawn or your level blueprint. But for this example, I'm going to do something a little different. We're going to use a game mode. So I'll show you that right now. So we can come to our blueprints folder, right click, do a blueprint class. You'll notice there is a game mode base. I don't want the base, I want the regular game mode. So I can just search and you'll see it's down here. Just highlight that, hit select, call it BP game mode. Oh, it auto saved on me. Game mode. And if I go to the world settings of my level, I can override to use that game mode. But the problem with that is we haven't defined a lot of the defaults. So you'll notice when I play it, it kind of breaks my level, right? I'm not Qbert and I don't have my camera set up right. So nothing's kind of working right. So if we open the game mode, you can go into the settings on the right side here. There's a default pawn class. Just set that to Qbert, compile and save. So when you play, it's back to how you had it before. And now we can begin to actually drive some of the logic that we have set up here. So we're not going to need tick, I don't think. But the first thing we want to do for this game mode is we want to create the widget that we made. So we can drag off and do create widget, do the WBP HUD, and then I'm actually going to right click, promote this to a variable, call my player HUD reference. That way I can use that later on in the code anywhere I need. So you can basically drive your logic wherever you want, but in this example, we're going to be using the game mode for a lot of that logic. So let's kind of like just outline it a bit. So there's 3 things we're going to be doing really. So we'll add a custom event. First one's going to be count the cubes. Then we need a way to decrease the cubes, right? When Qbert flips them. And then we need a way to start our timer, or like a game timer. So custom event and start timer. So I can highlight these, Shift A, line them up, and then I can space them out a bit. All right, so for count the cubes, that's pretty straightforward. You can drag off this and do get all actors of class, And the cubes in this case was the BP underscore platform, if you remember this one right here, right? So this little thing. So I can just do BP underscore platform, drag off the out actors into a length, which is basically the number of items. And then you can manually create a variable, or you can just right click, promote this to a variable. I'm gonna call it total cubes. And then just hook up these execution pins like so. And now that we have this reference, we need a way to pass this number to our HUD. But if you remember, we have a function called update the cubes. So let's use it. So we can just get a reference to our player HUD. Drag off this and do update the cubes. Hook this into here, and the integer into the integer value that'll pass through. Hit this thing and convert it to a text and display it on the screen, just like so. Now, this isn't going to work in its current form, which I can demonstrate here, right? Because A, we don't have the HUD, but B, we created the function to actually count the cubes and set it to an integer, but we never called the function. So that's an important part. So we actually need a way to actually call it too. Real quick, let's get the HUD working. Let's open up our player. Off the begin play, we can do a simple cast to BP game mode. We can drag off the object, do a get game mode. And then I'm going to right click, promote it to a variable. We'll call it game mode reference. That way we can use it later. But as the game mode, we can get a reference to the HUD. So get the player HUD. And then off that HUD, we can do add to viewport. Compile and save. So now we should have a working HUD that comes up. But it's not counting the cubes, right? So let's go back here. Inside the game mode, we have the function set up, but we need to actually call it. There's a bit of timing with this setup, so you have to understand that what gets called first. For Unreal Engine, the game mode spawns first, and then I've noticed the level blueprint spawns next, so a lot of the level stuff. So if you go to your level, open level blueprint, all this code basically runs. And then after that, it's things like blueprint actors and player pawns and stuff like that. So because of that, we can actually use the HUD reference would probably be the best. And then we can do it on a pre-construction. And then I think that makes the most sense. You could also do it off construction, but this way it would guarantee that you would count the cubes before creating the HUD, so it wouldn't show up as a 0. That probably wouldn't matter too much though, because I think it would still happen quick enough where it wouldn't be a problem. But simple enough, we can just cast to BP game mode, and we're kind of doing more of the same. Get the game mode, and then off the, yeah, we might as well make a variable, so we can call this game mode reference in case we need that later. I don't think we will, but it doesn't hurt to have it. But if you remember, our function on the game mode was count the cubes. So now when the HUD gets created, it's going to tell the game mode, go ahead and count the cubes. And then when you count the cubes, part of that at the end is to update the HUD with the number of cubes. So this should work now. So you can see we actually have 28 cubes in the scene, but it's currently not decrementing. So we need to set that up. So for decreasing the cubes, we're going to be basically getting a reference to our current cubes, coming off that and just do minus minus, and you have an option for decrement. And then if you hook that up just like that, that'll be enough to actually decrease it, but we need to pass that new information over to the HUD. Well, we already did that before, right? So we can do it the same way. So we can basically just drag out our player HUD reference and then drag off that and do update the cubes. And then just pass in the integer value. And then that should actually work. But there's nothing that actually calls this function yet. So if we play and actually move around, it's not decreasing the cubes. So you got to think, where's the best place to actually call the function? Well, you got two interactions going, right? You got one with the cube, and you got one with Qbert. So calling the function from either of those would probably work. For me, I'm probably just going to call it from the platform, the actual cube itself. So we can just use begin play actually. So we can do event begin play, more of the same, cast to BP game mode, and then do get game mode. Probably seeing a trend here. And then I probably won't need it, but might as well. Game mode reference, promote it to a variable. Now we got it. And then off the begin overlap, we cast the Qbert. We check if the thing is already flipped. If it's not flipped, we change the material to that the orange one. We mark it flipped, and then what we can do is we can grab in our game mode and then drag off this and then do decrease the cubes, or whatever function you named this right here. And then when you do that, it plays this function, which decrements the cubes, and then it passes it to the HUD. And then the HUD gets that and just updates the number into the text field in the designer right here. So if I did that right, we should notice that when you move around the map, your cubes left in the top left, or yeah, top left corner should actually go down, which you can see it is. So I think this video is already getting pretty long, but I do want to do one more thing. I'll show you the game timer. That's this piece right here. So the game timer is a little bit trickier. For that one, we can actually use what's called a, we can call a function based on a certain time. So it's a little bit weird, but we can do set timer by function name. And we can set this function to run every 1 second and loop it. All we need is a function. So let's go to our functions in the game mode, create a new one, call it maybe stopwatch. Whatever you name it here, that's what you want to put inside here. So just make sure that that name matches whatever function name you give it on this side. Now inside the stopwatch, we're going to need a couple variables, literally two. We're going to need one for seconds, and it's going to be an integer, and then one for minutes. Now I can just simply grab seconds, drag off that and do a plus plus to do an increment, and then I can come off the seconds and do a greater equal. I could say if it's greater or equal to 60 seconds, then I can come into a branch node, and if this evaluates to true, then I want the seconds to reset to 0. So I can add a set node and set seconds to 0. And then I want to get the minutes, and I want to plus plus or increment that to 1. And now I need to pass this information to our HUD. And if you remember, we created a function called update the time. So let's go back to the game mode. We have a reference to our player HUD, which we can use here. You can do a get. If you drag off this, you can do update the time. And then I can control D to duplicate that, because we need 2. And on the false pin, I'm going to be updating the time. And on the true pin, I'm going to be updating the time. The minutes are going to go in the minutes. And then the seconds are going to be going into the seconds. And then I can drag the seconds over here and the minutes over here. And this is basically our stopwatch function. It runs, all it does is one simple thing. It increases seconds by 1. If seconds reaches 60, then it sets seconds to 0 and increments minutes by 1. And then just passes that info to the HUD. But it only does it once. However, on our parent function, the start timer, it runs that function every 1 second on a loop, effectively making it a timer. So the problem though is, even though this is all set up, it's not going to work because again, we haven't actually started the timer. We haven't called this function from anywhere. So you have a couple different blueprints you can really call that from. I don't think in this instance calling it from the HUD would be a good idea because the HUD is getting created with the game mode, which is technically before Qbert. So Qbert would hit the map afterwards, so it wouldn't be like the player's perspective, they would spawn and the timer would already be running. I think it makes more sense to do it on Qbert when the player actually has control of the the actual character, the player, when they're actually playing the game. I think later on we'll probably do it off the we're going to make a little like flying saucer because Qbert doesn't start on the map, he usually flies in. So I think we're going to do something with that. So we'll do it off a end overlap function. But for now, just so you can see it works, on the begin play, we already made a reference to game mode, and game mode has the start timer. So I can simply pull off my game mode reference and do start timer. Drag that in there. And maybe I can organize this a little bit better for you. Maybe not, but that's the gist of it. I guess it's not too bad. And maybe I can move this up a bit. Okay, so essentially on a begin play, we're casting to the game mode. We're creating a reference so we have that game mode to do all sorts of stuff with. And then we're stealing the viewport that was created from the game mode, and we're also starting some functions on there. And then we can also do that from the platform as well, or the level blueprint. You can do it from a lot of areas. But you'll notice that now that I start the game, I have a timer, and my timer is actually running. When that gets to 60 seconds, it should actually flip over in the minutes count, so we can double check that. But I also need to double check to make sure that my cube counts are not wrong, which it looks like they might be. Yeah, it looks like they're right. Move that there, and 0, so you can see that's correct. So we don't have a win-loss condition yet, but I think this video is already running a bit long, so I think we'll probably tackle that one in the... Yeah, I think in the next video we'll probably be maybe focusing on either the win-loss or we might do the scores. Depends, I guess, how it gets built out here, but you can see there's a lot of different ways to tackle your code, so you don't have to do it one particular way. And it depends on the type of game you're making, right? So if you're doing a multiplayer game, it probably makes more sense to do this sort of setup, especially in relation to the game timer. Because if you were to code that logic on the players don't all hit the map at the same time, so the game timers would be out of sync, versus doing on the game mode, which gets populated first and only once, and then all the clients connecting would just reference whatever timer is currently playing. So you can see, depending on your implementation or your project, you might want to go one route versus the other. But all right, good people, I think we'll cut it here. So I think in the next video we'll focus on the score and the life systems so we can prepare for those win-loss conditions. But as always, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and see you on the next one.